episode of the Made in New York podcast with internet superstar Rick McGuire. Now, for some of you, that name may not mean anything. You probably know him better as Subway Creatures, who tells us the amazing story of now not just the New York City subway, but subway systems around the world. So tell us a little about yourself and introduce us.
Absolutely. My name is Rick McGuire, like you just said. I started Subway Creatures as a website back in 2011. This was actually before Instagram was even created. Then Instagram came along. I decided to move the account over to that. And before I knew it, it just kind of snowballed. There were a lot of larger accounts, media outlets that picked it up and gave it credit. And it just started, like I said, it started snowballing. And people started not only following it, but they started sharing the content, and it's up to, I think it's 1.4 million followers now, which I never would have imagined. But it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of work, but it's a lot of fun.
So let's talk. We'll definitely talk about the work. Let's talk about the beginning for a second. Like, what motivated you, one, to start the website, and then two, to move it from that to a new social media platform?
Exactly. So I was doing the commute just like we all do. Going downtown, riding the subway every day.
What was your regular gig?
Regular gig, I was a TV producer.
Okay.
So I was working in production, in television, and taking the subway twice a day, seeing all the stuff that we all see. The debauchery, the stupid, funny, bizarre things. And, I just doing a quick search, couldn't really find any place that hosted all of this content in one spot. I was like, oh, this might be an opportunity. So I started a website called Citi Subway Creatures. And, I originally started throwing up my own content. Then when the account started to gain a little bit of traction, people started sending me content. I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. I don't even have to go and film my own stuff. So people started sending me it. I started posting their stuff, and again, that's where it started to grow legs. And then I moved it over to Instagram.
Which was about when?
Instagram came out, I think, about 2012.
Okay.
And at the time, if everyone remembers, it used to just be pictures. And then they introduced video, and video were only 15 seconds long. And then there was 1 minute long videos. Then came stories. So that platform just kept evolving, and it just kept being a more appropriate place for this kind of content. And I do have a Facebook and Twitter account, but the following on those platforms are nowhere near the following on Instagram. And I think that that's mainly due to the fact that Instagram is becoming, one of the largest platforms that people use these days, up there with, I believe it's YouTube as well, WhatsApp, there's a bunch of different platforms that have large numbers, but Instagram, I think, is the fastest growing, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it all depends on the demo that you're targeting.
Right. And the demo for this page, thankfully, Instagram gives a lot of insights into that stuff. It is a little bit more men than women, but it's that 25 to 34 demographic that's huge.
Right.
And obviously that's big for advertisers, that's big for people trying to promote. So that's a really important demographic to have. And it's also the demographic that's mainly on Instagram.
Right. So you get on Instagram. Tell me about some of, you had the website's popping, you decided to move it to Instagram. Tell me about some of the early days.
The early days, which I think this is a good question because, I've done interviews like this before, and, everyone just kind of wants to know the origin, and then they move on to what's going on. But, it's a good question that you brought up because there was a lot of trial and error. There was a lot of a learning curve.
So let's talk about that. I'm sorry to interject. Trial and error. What were you trying, and where were you seeing wins versus shit that you were seeing not work?
There was, to be honest with you, even though I make it sound like, the account gained a lot of traction and it moved, there was a lot of negative press as well. And stuff that I didn't really think about. And what I mean by that, you know, I was posting almost anything that people would send in. And that included, you know, homeless people. That included mentally ill. That included drug addicts. Stuff that, you know, even though I felt in my head like, oh, this is just the stuff that people are seeing, sending it in.
It's a touchy point.
It's also touchy. It's also, you feel like now I'm subjecting these people who don't really have a chance at defending themselves. You know, there's a main difference between the people who are doing something like a busker, panhandler. They're doing something to gain attention to themselves, opposed to the guy who, you know, is sleeping on the train because he doesn't have anywhere else to go. There's a main difference in that, and people, I started getting called out for that, and rightfully so, in my opinion. And I started to realize, you know, people, it's really not vibing with people, certain stuff. So I was learning what was working, what wasn't. And, you know, you just start realizing that you need to focus more on the people who are doing stuff for attention. And even if they're not, there are other circumstances where, you know, I do a series now where it's people sitting under signs and they look like them. And it actually does really well. People love it. But that's an example of where sometimes someone is caught on camera and they don't mean to be. And that's an instance where in my opinion, it really can kind of go either way, because there's nothing, I'm not harming anyone by doing it. It's just they look like a person sitting under a sign. So it's very innocent. Whereas, you know, there may be, like I mentioned, you know, you don't want to just the homeless guy who's sleeping on a bench, or maybe a drug addict who is clearly like high and passed out or nodding off. There's just nothing even funny about that. And that's not the intention of the page. So, you know, there was a lot of learning in the beginning. And to be honest, I still am every day. I learn what works, what doesn't.
So what's something, and we'll skip forward, we'll go back, because you mentioned that. What's something that you remember, at least recently, or learning from?
Right. So recently, maybe this was a week or two ago, there was a video of a guy who was trying to switch cars, and some other guy had his foot up and was holding the door shut. And then the guy put his foot down, and the guy opened the door, and he leaned into the subway car and started barking like a dog. Now, again, this is something where, okay, I understand, because there was a lot of criticism about this post, because people were like, all you're doing is subjecting someone who's clearly mentally ill. But then you read through some of the other comments, and people are like, I see this guy all the time. He does it to try and make people laugh, so they give him money. He's a panhandler. So that's what I mean when there's a very fine line of trying to find, maybe the guy is mentally ill, maybe he's not, maybe he's just a panhandler trying to make people laugh. There is
So you let the internet be your filter?
In a way, I really try to filter stuff before it gets that far. However, it is interesting, I think, to read the comments and see how people feel, because there's an aspect of the account where people not from New York just don't necessarily get it. And if there are, I mean, their go-to about anything on the account are, this person's mentally ill. And we know as New Yorkers, that everybody's mentally ill. Everyone is mentally ill here.
You have to be mentally ill.
I know exactly what you mean when you say that, because it's not, you know, I remember there were a couple comments for that specific post where they were like, you know, every post on this account is just exploiting the homeless and the mentally ill. And, you know, that's when I wanted to kind of, sometimes you want to just reach out in the comment section and be like, show me one other post as an example of what you're talking about. But it's also, you're opening a can. If the second you open yourself up in the comment section, you could really be opening up a can where people are just going to start piling on, or you're going to have people defending. It could go either way.
I'm totally okay with going back after trolls.
Yeah, I mean, it's a slippery slope.
Unless like there's some validity in what they're saying, and then you're like, all right, maybe this is a teachable moment.
But what happened was, then there were other people who were New Yorkers who were saying, you're clearly not from here. You have no idea that this is just every day in the subway.
Right.
Like, if you think that this guy's mentally ill, everyone is mentally ill then, because this guy I've seen in the past, and he does this to try and get people to laugh, and he's trying to make money. And that's what I mean when I say sometimes it could go either way.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it was really interesting, instead of me jumping into the comment section and going after people, to watch people
back and forth
and watch that exchange. And you can see the New Yorkers or the people who get it kind of defending the page, and then you see the other people who, because the other thing is, don't follow the page if it bothers you. There's a very easy solution to this, where, I always think it's funny how people feel the need to kind of jump in and say how much they dislike something, but there's a very easier answer where all you have to do is just unfollow, and you won't have to deal with this anymore. But instead you're going to keep following, but you're going to let me know how much you don't like what's getting posted.
Right.
So, I know that that's the way the world works now.
Right.
I know that, everyone's going to do that. There are going to be trolls. There are going to be the comment section, which is the Wild West.
Yeah.
I mean, you never know what you're going to get in there. But that exchange and watching people, I think that that's one of the big popular aspects of the account itself.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a meme page. It's not one of these accounts where, it's posting viral videos. This is posting content that's very relatable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's why people follow it, and I think that that's why people tag each other and send it to each other, because we've all been the person who's on the train and the guy with the smelly armpits are hanging over your face in a packed train, And we've all encountered, these situations, and, not only that, but there's a lot of reoccurring characters where we all, I'll post a video of a guy, and everyone's like, oh my God, I saw that guy last week. Or, hey, they'll tag a friend and go, do you remember when we were going home that night and that person, we saw that guy?
Right.
So there's a lot of relatable stuff that I think really gives the account some life.
Mm-hmm.
And, especially in New York. You mentioned at the top of the show that it's international now. It's not just New York.
Right.
It's just New York has the biggest transit system, and the most, in my opinion, the biggest diversity of people that you're going to get all walks of life.
Right.
And that's what makes specifically the New York subway system very special.
So let's go back to the beginning. So you got this account, you're starting to get some traction on Instagram. Do you remember that first inflection point?
I do, actually. So I still, to this day, my girlfriend, as I think it was maybe it wasn't even a birthday present. She did it as this was the turning point. There was something I posted of a guy pissing off the platform onto the tracks.
Okay.
And this was still in the growing stages, because I don't even know if I would do that these days. Again, when a little bit of an advantage that I had in the early game, there was no algorithms on Instagram. There was no trying to beat these shifts of, that accounts are doing these days. It's almost impossible to grow an account these days, because you're up against, boosted pages and algorithms. So this was way before then, but I posted this, which probably would actually even get pulled down now, because the Instagram police are just, hardcore. I posted it. The New York Post did a 2-page article on the post talking about the account. Obviously, they had their own spin on it. They called me, and they wanted to do a phone interview, and I was all about it. I was like, yeah, definitely, this is great. I thought we were going to be talking about the account and all that, and of course, immediately came the questions, what do you think about de Blasio and how he's handling this? And I realized, of course, they're going to start putting a political spin on this. So I remained neutral, and I said, hey, I don't even talk about politics with people. B, the page is not about this. I'm like, I'll give you any information you want on the account, the posts, all that. I go, but as soon as we start talking politics, I don't know that I'm really going to go down that road, because I don't want to, the page isn't about that, and I don't want to make it look like I'm choosing sides.
Right.
However, the next day, they wound up doing a post online. And they told me, I don't know if this is even true, but they said it did so well online that the next day it was going to go into the paper. and it was going to be like a 2-page spread. So the next day I went out and bought a paper, and again, the account was not this big. I was so excited.
How many followers do you think you were at this time?
That's a good question. It was obviously enough where people at that point were looking. Maybe it was like 50,000.
Okay.
Again, at that point,
That's a lot.
At that point, I was very excited. I was
Right,
like
right.
50,000 for me. Again, never would have imagined that.
Right.
Never would have imagined what I have now. It came out in the paper, the 2-page spread. So my girlfriend went out. She got that framed, and to this day, it still is in my bedroom as a frame that we have the actual article. It's my interview. It's the picture of the guy, and it's all talking about subway creatures. That day, after that day, there was a radio show that asked me to come on. Because the media is
Once
very
one
cyclical.
dominoes falls, they're all going to fall.
They all
Yeah.
want to pick up each other's, and I've learned this through doing all this stuff. That exactly what you just said. When the dominoes fall, so the New York Post did this spread. So now all of a sudden you have, what is it, AM New York.
Right.
Then you have New York One. And now they're all picking up each other's feeds.
Right.
And they all want in. So, there was a lot of interviews, and I'm like, oh my God. So it was at that point, I ran out, I got the name trademarked. I wanted to start an LLC. I just need to protect myself however I can, because this is actually, I was doing it as a hobby, to be honest with you.
So you're still working at this point?
I'm still working. I was still working up until 6 months ago.
Okay, we'll talk about that.
Yeah. The dominoes fell. The account almost exponentially grew, and then you had larger Instagram accounts that were verified who were not only now using the content off your page, but they're also giving you credit, which is a big deal.
Right.
And because of all of that, now the audience is just flowing in and everyone's sharing it. And the huge advantage to this was that I was now becoming the first person to get what turned out to be viral content. So you're getting it before all these bigger pages. So it's a numbers game, obviously, in social media. So when you get it first, everyone starts crediting you, even though you're not necessarily the source.
Right.
But the one thing I was priding myself on was crediting the people who sent it in to me. I never was trying to claim any
Right.
content as mine. And that was huge because it
Supporting
was an
your
incentive. Yeah, the people trust me. They know that sending me content, they're going to get credit. And plus, people want that quote-unquote clout. So even if it's just their name getting, tagged in the caption, that's huge for them.
Well, it also probably adds them 500 to 1,000 followers.
Right.
Yeah.
So people, it's just an incentive for them to send stuff in.
Right.
So now, I'm getting all this content that's amazing, and it's coming to me first. There's also not really any other page that was doing what I was doing, so there was no competition.
Right.
So it almost created the perfect storm of a scenario of where an account is going to just kind of take off and grow. And I think that that's what happened.
So you get this post article, it leads to a bunch of other things, you run out, you protect yourself, right? And obviously in this period you're seeing growth. Like anything, you probably eventually saw some low or flattening.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that, how that felt, and like what you went to go through that to get that next inflection point.
Yeah, actually mine was pretty extreme. What ended up happening, this was maybe a year or two ago, I think it was actually 2 years ago. I'll never forget, it was right around Thanksgiving, and the account got hacked.
Okay.
And
So when you say hacked, you mean like somebody got your password and locked you out and like did whatever
and
they
they
wanted?
they changed the phone number on the account, so I couldn't even get the two-step verification or authentication. I'll never forget looking down at my phone, and I went to go check on the page, and it said you've been logged out, and I was like, that's weird. I'm like, I've never seen that ever before, and I went to go log back in, and it goes, it not only said this is not the password, it goes, the account Subway Creatures does not exist. And I'll never forget my heart just dropping. And I went on my private account and I tried to search for my account, and it wouldn't show up in the search. So I guess whatever happened, and this is what I found out later, very common for what hackers do, they got into the account, they changed all of the personal information, and then somehow made the account, even though it was still active, they made it disappear. So it wouldn't show up on a search. But what they do is they take it down to make it seem like it's not there. So basically you give up.
Right.
And then what they do is they change the name.
Right.
So that's exactly what happened. But what happened was I have a lot of friends who I DM with on that account.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, guys, I'm like, your DMs are still active with that account even though it's not showing up. You guys have to tell me, keep checking it every day and tell me when that account goes active again.
Yeah.
Because I knew it would. At this point, it is, I think, 500,000 followers. So and this was like years in the making.
Right.
So I was like, I might have even cried the night that I found out because I'm like, it's gone.
Right.
It's gone. I just put 8 years of my life into this, and it's gone. Just like that.
On a separate note, like at that juncture, did you have some like sort of backup system in place? Like, so everything that was on there you had on hard drive somewhere, or no?
No. And that was what was even more frustrating because those 500,000 people, I had no way of telling them that the account was currently hacked.
Uh-huh.
So what happened was the account did come live a couple days later. The person changed the logo. They unfollowed all the people that I was following, so those people couldn't necessarily see what was happening on the account. And they changed the name to Subway Madness. Now what they did was they wound up continuing to post Subway content. And then I started getting weird emails and DMs of other accounts saying, hey, we saw your account for sale on the black market. And there was this back page, and it was my account posted, and they were trying to sell it for $15,000. But I guess no one was biting at that amount. So what the person was doing was they were trying to run the account to keep it active so that way they could sell it.
Yeah.
When ultimately what wound up happening was they kept it active until I could finally get in touch with someone at Instagram to swoop in and swap out the password. But that process was awful. And it was hacked for a month. I was without the account for a month. So to answer your question in the long run, that was definitely an ultimate lull of having to watch my account get run by some hacker every day and then not know if or when I was going to get it back. Did
you ever find out who the hacker was?
No, and everyone kept asking. They were like, don't you want to go after that person and find out? And I was like, to be honest, I'm just so happy to have the account back at this point that, I feel like it'll never happen. I mean, it told me that the logins were coming from like Russia, and then it got pinged over to Tokyo. So they were clearly using some kind of system that it probably wasn't coming from those pings. It was like all over the place, but the logins were definitely coming from all around the world, and I'm just assuming, if this person knew how to hack an account, they also knew how to make it look like these pings are coming from other places.
Right.
But I got a ransom email saying that this is the most random thing. The email said, we had the email Subway Creatures created before you, and we buried Bitcoin in there. So there's a significant amount of Bitcoin invested in that email address. We'll give you the account back if you give us the password to your email. And I go, I don't know if you know how ransoms work, but you just told me that I have something that's more valuable than what you took from me. Like, I'll stick with the Bitcoin if that's how you want to play this. Like, it sounds like I have millions of dollars in Bitcoin. So, no, I'm not giving you back the password. And so, thank God they kept it alive until Instagram or Facebook came in and helped me out. But shortly after that, I wound up getting verified, which was huge because apparently that helps you if you ever get hacked again. It gets your account back faster. And it also protects you because there have been a number of mimic accounts that have popped up. And, that was just the way to say this was the first one, this is the official one.
Right. So you get the account back. What is your and obviously you're happy you got it back. You don't want to go to somebody's house and kill them. What does that first week look like? Like back after a month? Like I have to imagine that month you probably beat the shit out of yourself.
I did. It's funny because the account came back to me, I think it was like midnight on a random weeknight, and I was so excited.
Now, talk about that for a second. Was it like some special like email from Mark Zuckerberg, like, "Hey, buddy, I got you"?
It was actually, so I wound up having a contact there, just meeting, like, honestly, you can't find anyone who works at Instagram.
They don't nobody admits they work at Instagram.
No.
Yeah.
And you can't. So I was literally going on LinkedIn, finding engineers, just being like, please do me a solid,
It's a good strategy.
I didn't know what else to do. So I finally had a contact, and they were like, listen, here's how we're going to handle this. And so I got an email late that night, and it said, hey, go in right now into the account and switch the password. Like, make it whatever you want. They go, we don't recommend you use the same email because it could be compromised. And I did, and it logged the other person out, and whoever the hacker was, and that's when I knew. I switched the cell phone number, I created a new email, and that's when I knew. I'm like, I think I have it back. I wound up going into the account. I immediately swapped out, the logo. There was a lot of content that they were posting that people were even writing, and this was where I love the fans of the page. They were able to tell that it wasn't me the whole time, because people were like, something's up with this page, like the content, the captions are really bad, it just doesn't seem like the same person. Does anyone know what's going on? And then my friends were trying to help by responding in the comment section like, hey, the account's hacked, this is a hacker, because you have to also think, people were following Subway Creatures, and overnight, all of a sudden now that they're following an account called Subway Madness. So it didn't make sense to them.
Right.
And I went through the DMs. The hacker had been reaching out to people trying to sell the account through DMs. So I was able to kind of backtrack a little bit and see what had been going on. The hacker was also cursing people out in the DMs. Like, it was really bad because it's stuff I wouldn't do.
Right.
Again, I was just glad that the hacker kept the account alive, or else Facebook never would have been able to go in and actually get it back for me.
Okay.
So, in a way, it was a blessing in disguise. And that first week, so I got the account back at midnight.
Yeah.
I must have stayed up for 2 or 3 hours just curating content, going through everything, deleting all of his old posts. And then I actually had my girlfriend film me making a message to the fans saying, I haven't been running this account for the past month or so. I got it back. I just wanted everyone to know what was actually going on. And in a way, that message was almost as confusing for them because some people didn't know it was a hack, and they were like, all right, what the hell's going on? Because people don't know me either.
Right.
So it's like, who is this guy? Why is he making a message about this? So I tried to dumb it down as much as possible, but, I felt like there needed to be some kind of explanation as to why there were name changes and what had been going on for the past month. So, I was very excited. I spent that week just going through content, and trying to get right back to where I had left off.
Okay. So, you talked about 6 months ago you walked away from the regular job.
Yep.
Talk to me about like the thoughts and process that went up into that, hey boss, I quit, and then like the week after when now you don't have a job.
Right. So I'll tell you, even to this day, it's scary. It's scary in the sense where you don't necessarily know, especially in social media, it's very tough to monetize and have steady revenue streams. I was working in freelance, so in a way it was a luxury because, you're always, as a producer, you're always looking for the next job anyway.
Right.
You only usually live in that world as long as the project you're working on. So luckily the project I was on ended, so I was afforded the opportunity to kind of put a little more time towards the account, but then I wound up putting so much time into it that I realized I'm not even looking for a job at this point. However, I was trying to find ways of finding those steady revenue streams, which I'm still doing to this day. I mean, there's now a Subway Creatures podcast, which we're trying to build the audience up on that. And it's not as easy as I anticipated. And, that's one way of, finding revenue streams through advertising on that. You can also do live shows if your audience is big enough. And that's, I think, a little deceiving for some places because, you go to a venue and they see 1.4 million followers. So they think, oh, a podcast, yeah, let's host it. There'll be a $1.4 million eyes on it, and it's not the case because the podcast following is
different.
Significantly
It's a different
lower.
user.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
And I think the market's so flooded with podcasts that you really need to give people a reason to listen to yours and why they should listen to yours over someone else's. And it just didn't translate the way that I thought it would. And, so that was one way. There's a lot of advertising. I don't like to sell out. I don't like to throw ads on the account. However, on the swipe up stories, I feel like that's a whole different story. That's free game. So, you can do swipe ups for companies on that. I also have another account called What is New York? And, that's very on brand, I think, with what you have going on, which I appreciate. And I think that we even talked about that prior to the show a little bit.
Yeah.
And, that is basically Subway creatures above ground. And that also, creates a little bit of revenue. There's you work with different brands, especially local companies who know that you're appealing to a New York audience specifically. So that's really appealing for them. It's nowhere nearly as big as Subway Creatures, but I also only started that about a year ago. So, that's still growing. And, by doing all these different, whether it's satellite accounts or different versions of Subway Creatures, whether it's a podcast or, What is New York, there are different ways to monetize. It's just, you have to be aggressive with it because it's not just going to come to you. You kind of have to go to it sometimes.
So going to the monetization, because a lot of people, that's what they look for. They're like,
Absolutely.
I want an account I can monetize.
Yep.
Talk to me about the first monetization and what that made you realize.
Yeah, to be honest, the first one, I don't know if I remember the first one, but I do remember maybe the first couple. I don't know which one was actually first, but I was very big on not selling out. I didn't want to be one of those accounts that's posting Fashion Nova stuff, and all of a sudden you're like, oh God, you're just watching people say, what is this account becoming? I'm unfollowing it, whatever the case may be. And so that's why I really wanted to, unless you're going to give me a large amount of money, I'm not going to go out of my way to put it on the account. I'll do it on the swipe up story, but not on the account, unless there's a way of integrating. And that was a lot of fun because the first time was Bud Light reached out to me and they were doing a release with the premiere of Walking Dead. So what they wanted to do was they wanted to dress zombies up who were going to carry around Bud Light cans and 6-packs and cases on the train. So they were like, go down there and and film as much as you can and make sure this gets on your page. I was like, okay. So I went. They actually they rented a warehouse out to do makeup. They did 6 hours of makeup on all these actors. It was legit.
Yeah.
And they clearly put a lot of money into it.
But they let you produce the content?
Yeah.
Okay.
And they were like, just make sure it gets on your page. And to be honest with you, I mean, that's a case where I probably would have posted that anyway, but they wanted to make sure that it got on the page. And I was okay with it because it was so on brand with what we're doing. So I filmed all these zombies walking through the subway, holding Bud Light cases. No one even knew. I mean, yeah, you had to put hashtag ad in the caption.
Right. Yeah.
But people were overlooking that because of what the content was. And they didn't even care. So it wound up doing extremely well. I believe Bud Light was very happy with the outcome of it. And that was a perfect example of being able to integrate branding into a post that would have gone up either way. And, the money wasn't bad either.
Right.
And I was like, wow, I need to do more of this. And so now, not only...
So then, what did that look like? Like, you had that aha, I need to do more of that.
Yes.
Like, what did you then do to do more of it?
So I wanted to put a deck together, so that way I can kind of... but the problem was I didn't have the contacts to reach out. So now you're just basically cold calling and by cold calling, I mean DMing brands and companies,
right.
saying, hey, if you want to work together, I have a deck to send over. And, you're not always going to get responses.
Mm-hmm.
You're not always going to get what you want to hear. But, when you show the results of the Bud Light campaign, it does make a little
right.
bit of a difference, because
right.
you're like, hey, here are the numbers that this did. However, what you're not factoring in is how much money they actually put into that project,
right.
not just counting what they were paying me.
Right,
I mean, they dressed 60 actors up and spread them out all over the subway system. And then, there was a lot that went into that. So you also have to explain that aspect of it too, because
right.
it's not like I'm going to be doing all of that.
Right.
I'm just putting the focus on the account. But between that and what I'm actually working on now is doing a deck for music. I just did a project with Columbia Records with Hosier, the artist Hosier.
Mm-hmm.
And we went down the subway. He did a pop-up show.
Mm-hmm.
He sang 4 or 5 songs. It was amazing. He was amazing. And the post did so well. I was actually blown away by the numbers on it. And I was like, that's another aha moment I had, where I was like, why am I not doing a pop-up show with these famous artists once a month? I'll reach out to all these record labels. So that's something I'm working on now.
Okay.
Is the deck for that, handing out all the contacts in the record industry, in the music industry, and somehow collaborating with more musicians, because it's just one of those New York moments where you're walking and, oh, there's Hosier singing in the subway.
Right.
I mean, there was hundreds of people gathered around, and it was exclusive to my account, which was great for me.
Right.
And Hosier that week sold #1 on the record, on the Billboard list. So, I'm not saying it was because of me,
Right.
but I'm sure it didn't hurt.
Was.
And so it's like, let's do more of this.
Yeah.
This is great, and it's also a revenue stream where if I can do this and turn it into a Subway music series, all of a sudden, people on the account, I can send a video saying, hey, in a half hour, we're doing a pop-up show in Times Square. If you're in the area, stop by, and we'll be over here with whatever artist it is. And all of a sudden, people will come. I mean, that's what happened with the Hosier thing.
Mm-hmm.
We did a 15-minute heads up. People started
Through
showing
like stories?
up. Yep. And, Hosier even posted on his account. He goes, hey, I'm going down to the subway. I'll be at Rockefeller Center at 7 o'clock. And, thank God there were police there, because there was a lot of people, and it gets you get a little nervous sometimes, because you're like, wow, like, you can't really control this crowd if you wanted to. And you don't know, like, what if all these girls are going to swarm him? Right. And what happens then? He doesn't have security here. So it was good that we were in a popular area, because there were going to be cops there either way, because we did that show in, I want to say January or February. So it was still when the tree was up in Rockefeller. So there was a big police presence there.
Right.
And it was a lot of fun, and it worked out. He was amazing. He was actually better live than in his actual songs.
Oh, wow.
And, again, that's why I think using that example is so critical to a deck to present to other people, because then you can show those numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And, what I also wound up doing was posting what I called bonus content on the YouTube page.
Mm-hmm.
And that went viral. That went front page on Reddit, front page of YouTube. I think right now it has like 12 or 13 million views on it. And it's now like one of those recommended videos when you log into YouTube.
Yeah.
And that was my video. And even though I can't necessarily monetize off of that, because there's music copyright claims on it,
mm-hmm.
It still wound up getting me 40,000 subscribers on YouTube.
Right, which helps you get to your 4,000 hours, which helps you monetize the other videos.
God, it's just, that's what I mean when I was saying earlier, it's just everything's connected in some way,
mm-hmm.
and even though it may not help you up front with something specific, somehow it's connected to other things and it helps.
Right.
And that's another thing that I'm learning along the way.
So let's talk about that connectedness, right? Because that's essentially the reason you and I are here today. Because we have a mutual friend who was a past guest on the podcast who had a pop-up show that I came to, and we started talking, and that's we're here. How important do you think that is in growing in comparison to having the viral content?
I think that is, and it's so imperative. And I mean, the number of examples that I have, not only just this, but so many examples from even day one of ways that was working out. I mean, I remember there was a Subway singer, Mike Young.
Okay.
I remember reaching out to him. He was a guy basically homeless, singing in the subway for years, decades. All of a sudden, he got big, and his manager, he wound up getting a manager. His manager reached out to me. We just met for drinks, and it was just networking. He was the one who helped me get verified in the long run.
Oh, wow.
So it's like things like that, you just you never know. Just me DMing someone, and then he introduced me to his manager, who then has a connection at Facebook, who then helps me get verified. Like, that's it. That's one, I guess, good example of that. And you just never know who knows who. There's so many times where I've met people, and all we do is just exchange numbers, and it's like, oh, I met him at an art show. Somewhere down the road, you're like, hey man, I saw that you're doing this. I know a guy who does it, and all of a sudden now you have it's just having that Rolodex, and I guess I can use that word, and most people won't even know what those are anymore. But having a Rolodex like that honestly, it goes such a long way.
So, I mean, it really, I couldn't agree more. I think Instagram is the new phone book, and just the ability to access people. But getting back to those relationships, it's exactly. I've seen so many of those serendipitous events happen just randomly.
Right.
So you've got a lot going on. You've got other accounts you've started. You're 6 months into this being your only gig. Talk to me about the crazy in the back of your mind. I'm not going to do this today, but I want to do this at some point, maybe 3, 4, 5 years from now.
Right. So, one question that I get asked a lot is, where do you see this going? When is the Subway Creatures bubble going to burst? And I don't really necessarily like to think about that, but to your question, I think it is something that is in the back of my head. It's kind of like, I am a one-man show doing this alone, so if you don't build it, they're not going to come. So you just have to keep with the content, and that's one of the good parts about the New York City Subway. As long as it's there, you're always going to have content, and you really need to keep kind of evolving, not only with social media in general, because as you probably know, every day is a different story with these algorithms, and there's a new tool or a new option. You got to really keep up with that, which is a challenge. But you also need to kind of evolve. So what I mean by that is whether it's the podcast, okay, let's do that, but we got to keep going, because you can't get discouraged and then stop, and then all of a sudden you were getting a little bit of traction, and now you just stopped. You got to keep going with it. It may be a couple of years before you start seeing results, but you just have to keep doing it. This Subway music series, you have to keep sticking with that, because there are going to be companies that want to reach out to you. And along the way, like going off the network thing that you just talked about, I have so many contacts now, whether it's the music industry, whether it's charities, all of a sudden all these art, galleries that you work with, there's just so many different connections in so many different industries that the options technically are limitless. And I want to keep sticking with that, because you just never know where it's going to go. But maybe there's potentially room for a TV series, or everything's moving onto digital platforms. Maybe whether it's even a 15-minute show, maybe there's something there. So you just got to keep moving with this, and I think eventually, if you keep doing that, it's gonna come to a point where there are big revenue streams coming in consistently, and you won't have to worry as much about how am I paying my rent this month.
Right. So I have a couple of questions that came from Instagram.
Oh, I love those.
From a couple of followers. So Chef Josh, who is a really dope dude, he's like a 15-year-old chef that's working in Momofuku right now.
Good for him.
Insane.
Man. God, talk about
really killing it. He's gonna be a big dude at some point. Wants to know what makes the New York City Subway unique.
Well, that's actually kind of what I was going off of a little bit earlier, and it's a good question. So I think the amount of talent that's down there, I mentioned the Mike Youngs of the world who wound up going on James Corden.
Mm-hmm.
He got his video went viral of him singing in the subway. He wound up going on James Corden. Next thing you know, he's on America's Got Talent. He is now touring over in Europe. There's a guy named Verbal Ace, who's a beatboxer and also does voice impressions. Again, went car to car doing this. He's now on tour with Rascal Flatts, opening for them. There's so much genuine talent down there that goes unnoticed. And I don't even want to say unnoticed, but I think they don't necessarily have the platform to showcase what it is that they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I try to do with my account. And I've done with even those guys specifically, and that's why I know them, because I've worked with them in the past. I think that whether we hate it or love it, the New York City Subway has this feeling to it where it's almost like you're expecting the worst, but sometimes you get some of the best stuff. Mm-hmm. But we're all in it together, and what I mean by that is we've all been on the train mm-hmm. where it's rush hour, and all of a sudden, the mariachi band comes on, mm-hmm. and you're just like, for Christ's sake, I can't do this right now. But we're all in it together, we've all encountered that a number of times. That everyone in that train is all in it together. And the relatable stuff that we all go through. We've all been there, and we've all encountered the same kind of thing where the guy clipping his toenails in the corner, or, we've all seen it and we've been down there, and that's what makes it so unique and special. And it's also the biggest system in the world. So you're going to encounter this stuff no matter what when you have 8 million people on top of each other in one subway system.
And it's the only one from
24 hours.
24 hours.
It is.
There now are parts of the London Tube parts that are 24 hours, but it's the only fully 24-hour system in the world.
And you know what? I think a lot of people, obviously as much shit as we talk about the New York City Subway, you have to remember this system was built in like 1903.
Right.
And, even though it seems like nothing has changed since then,
right.
for it to be that old and still be running 24 hours a day with 8 million people in the city, I get it. I know that it's not always reliable, and there are certain things that we wish changed about it. But all that aside, that system has held up for the most part, and I think that a lot of people don't realize how sophisticated the shit is that happens underground.
Oh yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Considering it's running on like 1915.
Some of those trains look like they're from 1903.
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so we have another question from TK Mills. He wants to know what your favorite breakfast cereal is.
Oh, I am a huge Cinnamon Toast Crunch fan.
Nice.
And I will say, a thing that I have always done my whole life, I mix cereals. I mix them together.
All right, so what are some of these mixes?
So it's like a frosted mini wheats with Cinnamon Toast Crunch, little 50-50 action, and it's I highly recommend it. It may look a little weird at first, but it's awesome. We're gonna
definitely have to try that out. that sounds good. It really does.
Good question though. I have never gotten that one before.
So last question, and I'm guessing you've gotten this one a couple of times. This is from TK3. Talk to me about what running your account looks like.
Okay, that is a good one. That at this point, it really almost is a full-time job.
Okay.
I wake up in the morning, basically roll over, pick up my phone, look at any, weird notifications I have. What I mean by that is that I shut all notifications off for the account because my phone would basically, the battery would be dead. However, every once in a while you get some where it's either someone reaching out about, a sponsorship or, so I try to go through those first because sometimes those can be urgent. But then you have to go through the actual DMs, the emails, and you immediately start curating because, again, like I mentioned earlier, you have to, if you get one of these videos, let's say someone sends it to me, but then they're going to send it to 2 or 3 other accounts that have interns or other people running them 24/7 where they can post it before me, and you kind of lose a little bit of your edge because you weren't one of the first to get it out there. So what you're looking for are those really viral clips where people, that as soon as I throw this up, people are going to love it and the other accounts are going to pick up. And a good example of that, there was a guy carrying a metal beam through the subway, and I got 3 or 4 videos, different angles and subway stations of this guy doing it. So I pieced them all together, and for an entire day, it was almost a journey of everyone following the account. Where's the guy now with the metal beam? Oh, look, he's now transferred trains at 14th Station. And because the account's so big, people are taking these videos in real time and sending them to me. And I have to be on top of my game and make sure that I keep posting these, because it now becomes a thing. I don't know if you remember when Balloon Boy was flying. We all thought that there was a kid in the balloon flying, and the country stopped what they were doing for the day to watch this balloon fly to the sky. I'm not saying this was that extreme, but it was kind of an example of that where we all wanted to see where's the guy, or there was another example of a guy with a couch. He was moving a couch by himself through the subway system. Where's the guy with the couch? So you kind of really have to be on top of your game when it comes to.
So you're jumping between Instagram and email like all day.
Yeah, and you try to get ahead of the curve as much as possible. You try to get through as many DMs as you can, as well as emails, DMs and emails, and then on top of that, now you have to move on to, okay, now what's the podcast content going to be for this week? And then after that, okay, what kind of sponsorships or ads do I have lined up? So it is, and then that's just Subway Creatures. That's not counting the What is New York. Then you have to go over to that one and do the exact same thing.
Right.
You got to load up the stories. You got to make sure that there's at least a post, at least one for the day, possibly 2. So it's very time consuming. But what keeps it interesting and fun is that you never know what you're going to get in these DMs. It could be anything, and you have to watch it to know if it's going to be usable or not.
Right.
I mean, there's really dark stuff. There's, believe it or not, there's people filming people jumping in front of trains and stuff. So you almost become desensitized after a while, because you're just like, I'm watching a clip thinking, okay, maybe this is going to be something funny. And then all of a sudden something like that happens. And then it could be something really funny. It could be something happy. It could be, there was a video that I remember opening up, and it was just it was a couple, maybe in their 80s. And they're just embracing each other on the train. And you're like, that's just really sweet. Like, there's nothing more to it than this is just like a genuine moment. It could be something really disgusting. You just never know what you're going to get. So that's what keeps it interesting, but it's very time consuming. You can only imagine living with a girlfriend who is like, just put your damn phone down, for
My
once.
wife tells me the same thing, and I only have 7,000 followers, so it's totally okay.
So, there is this addicting aspect to it where you're like, I just need to keep going through content, but there is a human side where you're like, you got to know how to balance the two, and you have to know, okay, it's time to put my phone down, at least for a little bit, and have some human interaction, get out of my apartment, and...
Do you find it easier because your face isn't on the account?
I kind of do that intentionally. I mean, I'm not against it, but I also... This is exactly how I explain it to people. It's Subway Creatures is Subway Creatures. It's not Rick McGuire presents Subway Creatures. And it's the way it started, and that's the way it still is. And I just, in my opinion, I want it to be that way. Again, I'm not against it. I've said that to people, and they're like, oh, well, we don't have to identify your name with, what we're doing. And I'm like, no, it's not about that. I don't care. It's just... I don't feel like I need to step in front of the camera and then all of a sudden have people be like, who the hell is this guy? Why is he there? Like, it's not about me. What I could do, which is what I do with like the podcast, I could do a side project. Every once in a while there are times where I have put myself on the page where I tried to explain after the hack. I did a big thing with charity. Again, it wasn't doing it because I wanted my face out there. I was doing it because I wanted to bring awareness. We were going around putting shoes on homeless people, and I wanted people to be aware that this program exists and how they can help if they wanted to. There are certain instances like that where I will definitely put myself in front of the camera, but for the most part, I want it to be its own thing. I want people to take it for what it is.
Right.
I just did a podcast a couple weeks ago where the girls were saying to me, we didn't even know who the guy behind the account was. We didn't even know what to expect when you were coming in.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was a great point. I'm like, just looking at the voice of the page and the content, what did you picture? Mm-hmm. And they were like, we, for some reason, thought it was a black guy with dreads. And I go, that is so random.
That's funny.
I go, that is so random. I go, why did you think that? And they just started laughing. They go, we have no idea. Yeah. Maybe it's the tone, the voice, maybe it's the content. Yeah. They said, we don't know, but we didn't know who it was.
Yeah.
And I said, I made it that way on purpose.
So it's working.
It's working. And again, I have no problem doing it. It's just, people love it for what it is. I had a woman at the show that I met you at.
Yeah.
And she pulled me aside when she found out who I was. And she said she struggled with depression for most of her life. And my page is one of the bright spots to her day. And that was probably one of the most moving and touching things that anyone's ever told me, because I never thought about it that way. Right. And she goes, I laugh at your page and it's one of the bright spots of my day. And I've been battling depression for a long time. Mm-hmm. She goes, I just felt like I needed to tell you that. And I go, I'm so glad you told me that. That is just one of those things that, again, I had no idea. To me, the Instagram page is a bunch of numbers. Mm-hmm. And even though, it's fun to scroll through and see the celebrities that follow you and the verified accounts, it's just 1.4 million. It's just a number to me. There's no way to really, in my head, quantify that and make it tangible. So when I have random strangers coming up to me saying things like that, it's
more valuable than that blue check following you.
Exactly. Yeah. It really is. And that's really a good way of putting it. And, those are the moments that I'm like, as time consuming and as stressful as this can be, those are the moments that you're like, you know what? God damn it, I'm doing this. I'm gonna keep going with this. This is awesome. And even if that happens once a year, right. If that, right. That's enough to just keep it going for me.
I couldn't agree with you more. Listen, I think this has been amazing. I feel like I could literally sit here and talk to you for
thank you for having
another 5 hours about
really
Instagram and the Subway.
You having me on.
Before we leave, and you've probably been asked this, has there been a post that's totally shocked you and blown you away as to how well it's done versus what you expected? And what did that teach you?
Yeah, well, I guess in a literal sense, there was someone sent in fairly recently about someone who put human shit on all of the turnstiles and the card swipers. And that was probably the worst I've ever seen. I mean, that was really bad. And so what we actually did is we went down, and as people were going through those exact turnstiles, we were showing them the video and getting their reactions. And they were just like, well, that's New York for you. It was such a New York response.
Yeah.
But what I took from that and what I actually figured out afterwards, you just got to assume shit's on everything in the subway. So in a literal sense, that's probably the best example of that. But I think going back to what we were talking about in the beginning of the show, really the learning by experience when I first started the page, there was definitely a couple times where I posted, whether it's homeless people or, drug addicts, just tweaking out on the train. And I just remember feeling like shit. I just remember being like, why am I posting this? What is anyone really gaining from this? This is not what I want this page to be. Yeah. And it was reflected in the comments. And I took it down, and I remember at that point, that was a big turning point for me. Just saying I really need to be more careful with what I'm posting, because another thing that we didn't really get into but goes hand in hand with this, when you have 1.4 million followers, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with that.
Okay.
And you just have to assume that's 1.4 million, possibly more, who are going to see this, and they actually listen to what you're posting. They see what you're posting. And if you say something that's maybe a little not tasteful or whatever the case may be, people are listening, and like there's a responsibility that comes with it, and it's a big responsibility, because if you even throw false information in there, you could be ruining someone's life who's in that post, you know, and you've got to be very careful with how you go about, you know, running a page like that. So, you know, that was stuff I learned early on, and like I said, I'm still learning today. I'm learning every day about, you know, what people like, what people don't like, what people think's funny, what's not funny, what to stay away from. It's just every day is a learning experience, especially when it comes to, you know, the interactions on the subway and the content that I'm using. So, you know, that would hopefully answers your question, but that was definitely something that I picked up from this account alone.
Listen, I definitely think you're going to do a lot bigger and more amazing things, and this is probably
that,
just the start.
Yeah.
So in a couple of years, we'll sit down and you'll have 45 million followers
I can't wait.
collectively, and I'll probably still have like 8,000. But it's all right. It's okay.
No, I appreciate that, man.
But listen, I appreciate you coming. Thanks for joining, and I look forward to maybe like collaborating on something in the future along maybe a charity line.
Oh, listen, I'm always down for charity.
Yeah.
Again, going off of the influence thing, when you have an account that big, you want to do something good with it. So
Right.
I'm always down for the charity stuff.
Cool.
Thank you very much, brother.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.